Okay, great. And we're just gonna get right into it. So thanks for joining. All right, everybody. So thanks for joining us. We are going to hear presentation and information related to the Eagle County Code Cohort process. So let's begin. First off, I just want to give a big shout out and thank you to all of the participants that have helped facilitate this code cohort process. So from Lotus Engineering and Sustainability, we have Kim Schlepfer, who many of you know. Kim unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, but she has been the lead facilitator for this effort. So thank you to Kim, as well as Claire, who's a research associate with Lotus. And then from SWEEP, we have Christine Brinker, who you'll hear from later on in this presentation, and Shauna Mozingo from Mozingo Code Group. And then from the Walking Mountains team, we have myself, Gina McCracken, Climate Action Collaborative Manager, Will Barrar, our Climate Action Collaborative Coordinator now, and Nikki Moline, who assisted with this effort. So thanks to all of our code cohort leadership. Just to give you an idea of what we will be going over today. So we are going to review the agenda as we are right now. We're going to give you a little overview and some background on this project, and then review the community sustainability goals for Eagle County and how they relate to the code cohort effort. And then we are going to hear from Christine and Shauna regarding the 2021 IECC codes, as well as the residential and commercial strengthening amendments that we are recommending. We will leave some time today around 1:15 to hear a Q&A from the audience, and then we will discuss some next steps for the project timeline. All right, so just to center us all in the code cohort work, it's important that we reflect back on our Eagle County Climate Action Plan commitments. So our community is committed to 50% greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030 and 80% by 2050. And the work that we have done to bring our communities up to the 2021 IECC and pass consistent supporting amendments directly correlates to our emissions reduction goals, as building code and sustainability are very intertwined. Now, zooming in a little bit to the Climate Action Plan itself, and specifically the building sector, we do have immediate priority actions that our community is tasked with accomplishing in order to meet our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. And it's important that I share that these immediate priority actions were produced through climate modeling. So we know for a fact that if we accomplish these priority actions, we will achieve our emissions reduction goals. So that's a very important thing that I share with you all today. So looking at that second priority action, we need to make sure that we are adopting above building code standards and incentives in implementing net zero or all electric construction by 2030, as well as work toward consistency across jurisdictional boundaries. That second sentence there is really important here, as we had representation from all communities within Eagle County, including the county, as a part of this process. All right, so just a little bit of background on Colorado code cohorts. This is the first cohort that Walking Mountains and myself have been a part of, helping liaise the Eagle County communities. But there was a grant awarded from DOLA to Boulder County to assist in a similar code cohort effort, and help Boulder County communities adopt the 2021 code and pursue consistent supporting amendments, as we have done with Eagle County communities. That process was seen with resounding success, which led the CEO to approve Lotus and SWEEP to offer these cohorts around Colorado, as we are doing here in Eagle County. And at that point in time, Eagle County, SWEEP, and the Colorado Energy Office organized and approved Lotus and SWEEP to support Eagle County communities in this effort. So that's just a little bit on how this code cohort came to be. So some overview of the project goals for the code cohort. Really, the purpose is to collaborate on reviewing and adopting the 2021 IECC codes with consistent supporting amendments. That consistency piece is really important. We want to make sure that our builders and contractors here in the Valley, experience ease as they are constructing new buildings, and they aren't having to abide by one code in one community and another in another community. So that consistency piece has been critical to our work. and more about the goals. So we want to achieve countywide adoption of the 2021 energy codes and all other building codes. And we will hear more information about what these codes entail later on in the presentation. We also want to identify a countywide adoption of supporting amendments for all Eagle County communities to advance our climate action goals. We will also go over those supporting amendments with you all here today. And additionally, we want to align with the state code efforts, and we will hear more from Shauna and Christine on what those code efforts are and why it's important that our code cohort recommendations and eventual adoption of these codes are out ahead of what the state is going to require and regulate across Colorado. Just want to give a nice shout out and acknowledgement to the communities that have participated in this work. So thank you to the staff members from Town of Avon, Town of Basalt, Town of Eagle, Eagle County, Town of Gypsum, Town of Minturn, Town of Red Cliff, and Town of Vale for joining us with this effort. A little bit on the observing communities. So Town of Basalt is nestled up in the Roaring Fork Valley. And so they're really focused on aligning with the Roaring Fork Valley, which makes complete sense for the same reasons that I shared regarding that consistency piece. But they are already underway with their 2021 code adoption and aligning with the Roaring Fork Valley communities. And so they just participated in an observing fashion to learn what we were doing down in the Eagle River Valley. And in terms of gypsum was not ready at this point in time to commit to adopting to the 2021 IECC code, but of course they wanted to learn about and provide voice to the recommendations that we would be providing for the other communities. So thank you to the Town of Gypsum for attending and being a part of this process. Town of Red Cliff had joined this effort towards the tail end, and we are actively working with Town of Red Cliff on their code adoption efforts. All right, now I'm going to pass it off to Shauna to discuss the 2021 IECC codes.
All right, thanks so much. We can just go to the next slide. Then we just kind of give you a really brief overview of what's coming in the base 2021 IECC. Most of the changes are to increase clarity and increase efficiency. You could just go back one, there you go. PNNL or NDOE have determined that it's about an 8.5, almost a 9% jump from the 18 to the 2021 in efficiency. So that's great. We're making those steps to get better. Those, you can see a lot of those changes in a better thermal envelope requirements, insulation, windows, that sort of thing. More duct testing requirements, some lighting controls that have come into residential that were never there before, maybe in commercials, air leakage testing that was for more buildings than we used to have before, some more efficient mechanical, some more efficient lighting, a revamp of the whole additional efficiency package option to a point system. So there's some changes in there that get us that approval. It was overwhelmingly approved by the code officials. So if you're not familiar with the process, it goes through a committee hearing, and then it goes through a public comment hearing, and then it goes through an online governmental vote. So it passed everything that's in the 2021 now as a base, passed through all of those. So it's been overwhelmingly approved across the country. Again, just cleaning it up, clarifying each time we put something in the code, maybe by the next cycle, we figure out how people use it and how they interpret it, and we clean it up and clarify things more. But I just want to point out that there's maintaining a huge focus on flexibility and options. So there's no mandate that thou shalt do this. There's a lot of options in there, a lot of different pathways to do things. So that flexibility is key to getting compliance. And no real negative overall housing affordability. Yes, there's an upfront cost, but then you get to offset that with a better energy bill. So it works itself out in the end. Next slide. There you go. Okay. So there are some people that have already adopted, quite a few actually. But within the cohort, Vale is on the 2021 already with some EV and solar ready. Some other jurisdictions are planning to move forward with it. I think we just met this morning with Eagle, and there. So everybody's in the process. There's a couple that are just going to go to the 18, but a lot of people you can see in the process of going to the 2021. So that's awesome. I'm really proud of the work that this cohort has done to get the whole community to move forward together for consistency, helps designers and contractors alike. All right, next slide. So outside of the cohort, some other jurisdictions, you can see there's a lot of jurisdictions that are going to the 2021 IECC. Those listed here plus more. I think that with the state requirements that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, a lot of jurisdictions hurrying to move before July. So the majority of jurisdictions will either get to the 18 or the 2021 right away. There's some jurisdictions still on the 2015. Right now, the state law says you can be on the 15, 18, or 21. So few stragglers that are on the older code than the 15 that are hurrying to catch up. But it's nice to see that the majority of people where the construction is taking place, especially, are getting to that 2021 or at least the 2018. Next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, I think this is Christine. Or somebody, I'm not sure who's this is.
Yeah. Hi, Christine Brinker with Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, and I'm going to tell you about the new Colorado state law that passed in May that affects energy codes, and we want to make sure that our recommendations and the adoptions that Eagle County jurisdictions are going forward with are in compliance with state law and don't conflict with that. So the bill that the legislature passed says that all jurisdictions in Colorado need to adopt at least the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code and EV ready, PV ready, and electric ready when they're updating any other building codes. And that kicks in starting July 1st. And then those minimums then get bumped up July 1st, 2026 to what's called a low energy and carbon code. And again, that is only when updating any other building code. A new state energy code board is meeting right now to review and select the exact language for those components, but jurisdictions don't have to adopt that exact language. They just have to meet something equivalent or better. And so, as I said, when we were writing these amendments and reviewing what would be optimal for Eagle County, we kept in mind this Colorado state law to make sure that we are in compliance with it. So now, without further ado, some of the supporting amendments that we are considering. Next slide. All of these have these in common. The amendments include solar ready, EV ready, and electric preferred. The reason these are put in or being proposed to put in is that it is many, many, many times cheaper to build homes and buildings right from the very beginning, rather than burden future homeowners and building owners with retrofitting them later, because those retrofits involve so many additional costs, tearing up walls, sometimes tearing up parking lots, electrical system retrofits, and then all of the additional permitting headaches, et cetera. So we're making sure that the buildings that we're building today will be suitable to the best of our knowledge in the coming 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, all the way up to hopefully 100 years or more. The other critical aspect for why these amendments in particular are being considered is for equity reasons and for renters, which by and large do not have the practical or sometimes legal ability to make any changes to the places that they're renting. And they're kind of basically stuck with the condition of the building as they rent it. They can't make efficiency upgrades. there. It just doesn't work. So to look out for lower income families and renters, we want to make sure that buildings are as efficient as possible from the very beginning. And then finally, of course, aligning with Eagle County jurisdiction's climate goals. So we'll look into a little more detail on each of those in turn. And I'll pass it back to Shauna. We're just going to kind of tag team some of these to talk about Solar Ready.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so just as we go through these are the recommendations that the cohort kind of collaborated on and agreed to, and that we feel will meet or exceed the expectations that we feel will come out of the state committee, the State Energy Code Board, what they're going to write. So as we move forward, is Solar Ready? To the next slide, please. So Solar Ready, there's two right now. This is already in the Energy Code. The 2021 Energy Code, and it was actually in the 2018 as well, has provisions for Solar Ready. They are an appendix, so it's only if you adopt it, and we're going to, of course, recommend adopting these appendices chapters so that we get these Solar Ready provisions. These are more of an upfront plan review design type of requirement, more so than a physical install other than the conduit. So it just requires that you identify on the plans where the space, where you've saved space on the roof for future solar, where there's space in the panel, where you have the structural capacity for the roof, it can handle the loads, that the conduit is run, where that conduit might be run, things like that. So it does have plenty of exemptions in it for, if your neighbor's building is shading you, or there's too much shade, or your roof isn't, it doesn't have the right layout to accommodate it. There are definitely exceptions in there. And so it's really just looking at, show us that you've planned for it, so that if somebody wants to come do it later, they can, that they know that they have a roof. They don't have to hire an engineer after the fact to go back and reevaluate the load. It's already been evaluated at time of construction, their space, that sort of thing. It does exclude multifamily. The way that the codes get written, there's different committees, and for some reason on the residential chapter, they excluded multifamily, but we have a fix for that. To bring the multifamily back in for those who want to include it. Next slide. There's also one for commercial. And so the commercial one, because it is a different committee, it does include some multifamily. It actually says that it only accounts for buildings 5 stories or less, and multifamily commercial buildings are only 4 stories or higher. So you have this 4 and 5 story buildings that it applies to for multifamily, but all commercial buildings, it's, again, an appendix chapter that's already in there. This is 40% of the roof area, minus some of the skylights and green roofs and that sort of thing, has to be reserved for future solar, free from obstructions. It does ask you to, look at the load and make sure that you have at least a 5 PSF for the different loads to accommodate the solar. It does ask that on the plan, you identify the pathway for that conduit from the solar ready zone to the panel, to the storage, to any like energy storage or hot water system. And so it's just asking you to identify that. And then it does ask for, to identify on the plan a minimum like 2x4 room, 2x4 square feet room where you can accommodate electric energy storage systems, and just asking you to identify such of a space, and then identify on the control of the electric panel that it says that it's saved for electric storage, solar electric and storage. And then of course there's a new requirement in the code for all of these certificates that identify a lot of different things in the that go into the building, and the information about the solar system or the solar ready zone has to be included on that certificate. Again, lots of exemptions out of it for if you already have renewable energy systems, or if you don't have, if it's shaded for 70% of the time, or different systems that might be special design. And so again, the multifamily issue, we do have a simple fix for multifamily that's just for both the residential and commercial, that just says, you know, this applies to anything that the rest of the commercial requirements apply to, or the rest of the residential requirements apply to. And so that you aren't picking and choosing which multifamily buildings get it and which don't. So pretty simple. Again, goes back to just so much cheaper and so much easier to do ahead of time. But this one, I think maybe we have one more slide that for Solar Ready. Do we have one more slide? Yeah. Okay. Well, so the only thing I was going to say is that it's definitely cheaper and definitely easier. And there's a lot of people in here that are already doing it, that are within the cohort and out. So Avon, Basalt, and Vail already doing it. Basalt's doing it for residential and commercial. Again, they're in the Roaring Fork Valley, but have been participating as a in this. So other communities, a lot of other communities doing it. Also, Golden does it through their sustainability standards, but there are a lot of people adopting this, helping a lot of jurisdictions adopt code right now, and just about all of them. This list is, you know, growing every single day on who's adopting the appendices standards, because again, it's not requiring that you put in solar, it's just saying, hey, let's make it ready for those who want to do it in the future. I think that might be the end. Oh, cost, yeah. Cost is so minimal because the only real cost is mostly at plan review and at design phase. And so the only real cost is that conduit being run. So we price that out at about $200 or less to run that conduit and show where that conduit's being run. There's, again, not a requirement for the solar system, but if you did it, you could lease it. Yes, there's a monthly fee for leasing, but again, offset by the energy savings. So you could purchase it. There are lot of federal and state incentive programs available. I was researching them just today for another jurisdiction. Quite a few incentive packages out there. So it's great. There's a lot of different ways to add the solar. We're not requiring that you do it. We're just asking that you make it ready so that if somebody wants to do it, they have an easier time. Christine?
Now on to EV ready. The reason we want to adopt EV ready codes is because EV vehicles are arriving very quickly. We have about 10% of sales in Colorado of vehicles are EVs as of 2022. And all of the major car manufacturers have announced plans to convert the majority of their fleets over to all electric. We want to make sure that our homes and buildings can accommodate charging of those, because as you see here, stretching an extension cord out is neither safe nor effective. This is, we think, the most common amendment we see asked for in jurisdictions across Colorado. Next slide. So you'll be in good company. These amendments have 3 different levels of EV readiness, you could say, and these are terms that you'll start hearing a lot. EV capable means just the panel capacity and the conduit. EV ready means that it has the actual outlet where you can plug it in, not an official EV charger, but what we call a dryer outlet. It's not exactly a dryer outlet, but that kind of gives you a sense of what it is. And then the third would be an actual EV charger installed. So with that, next slide. We have a ton of jurisdictions in Colorado already with the EV ready building codes. And on the residential side, it's quite easy. It's almost always just one EV ready space per garage. And that is what we're recommending here as well. On the commercial side, next slide, it gets quite a lot more complicated. As you can see, each jurisdiction has different levels of and amounts for what percentage of EV capable versus EV ready versus EV installed. And to summarize all of that in the next slide, we can see a couple of trends here. One trend is stronger requirements in general, but especially for multifamily. And that is in recognition that most people just want to plug in their car when they get home and have it ready the next morning. Having additional chargers around town is more useful for travelers, tourists, and then people that need a quick boost. But by and large, at home is the easiest and most convenient way to charge. So higher numbers of EV charging there. Newer adoptions are tending towards percentages rather than number of spaces. And then finally, including a number of universal spaces for accessibility. And universal spaces are essentially an EV space that is large enough to accommodate accessible vehicles such as wheelchair vans, but not exclusively for their use. It's a bit like the disabled stall in bathrooms that are large enough for disabled people to use, but not exclusively limited to their use. And so that's how we're handling accessibility in the EV charging. So we took all of those statewide adoptions so far and looked in particular at what's already in place in Eagle County and what is likely to comply with the state law, and condensed it down to this chart here with a certain number of EV installed, EV ready, and EV capable spaces. Next slide. Costs for EV ready are all over the board. We're starting to get more costs in. For the residential side, they all tend to be around $400 upfront. And then for multifamily or commercial buildings ranging from 300 to 750, sorry, 300 to 1300. It depends on what level and where it's located. In contrast, retrofitting those in costs many times more, about typically 5 times more. Next slide. Okay, the next topic is electric preferred. And this is newer to the scene. We weren't hearing much about electrification 5 or 10 years ago, and now it's in every conversation about energy efficiency, climate, and energy codes. And if you're not familiar with it, it means upgrading appliances or equipment or vehicles that would otherwise run on a fossil fuel, converting those to electric versions. Next slide. The reason that this is on the scene now, whereas we didn't hear from it a number of years ago, is first and foremost technical advancements, heat pump technology in particular. It used to be the case that it wouldn't perform as well in our cold Colorado climates in the winter time. That's no longer the case because heat pumps can work down to minus 20 degrees. It depends on your configuration. And then their cost has also plummeted. Second of all, we have more and more renewables being added to the grid. So using that renewable energy for heating and water heating is another way to get those energy loads onto those renewables and have zero carbon. Whereas the grid used to be a lot more powered by fossil fuels. And so it wouldn't make sense from a carbon perspective to switch. Now it does. And we're combining that with climate goals across all our jurisdictions. Next slide. Okay, so the terminology for this, electric ready and electric preferred. All electric is the final option, which isn't on here, but electric ready is similar to the other solar ready and EV ready, where it is just making sure that there is the conduit panel capacity and or wiring to accommodate future electric versions. Electric preferred is very similar. It still allows the choice of either all electric or natural gas, but buildings and homes that do put in natural gas equipment add in some extra efficiency measures, essentially to compensate for those extra emissions. It's not an exact science, but that's the intent there. Next slide. So where does this fall in the ranking? It's I would say medium. So mild would be electric ready, medium electric preferred, and then the most aggressive ones electric only with broad exceptions, or electric only with rare exceptions. Next slide. Okay, so in Avon, they have a step towards electric ready requiring a 200 amp panel. Basalt has electric ready and Vail has electric ready. Others statewide are moving more towards electric preferred now, especially since electric ready has become the new default minimum with the new state law. This is also combined with huge incentives now from the Inflation Reduction Act and the state that all combine to make electrification more cost effective than it used to be. Next slide. For costs, the high efficiency electric equipment such as heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, they cost more upfront than their natural gas equivalents, but then you save on not having to install natural gas piping to the home or building or within the home or building, and you also don't need a separate air conditioner. And so when you add all those together, the all electric option comes out to be roughly equivalent, sometimes less than a natural gas new home or building. Those costs vary, of course, according to contractors and builders, what equipment they're using. The more familiar they are with heat pump technology, the more likely those costs are to be comparable. Sometimes they cost extra if it's something new that a contractor hasn't dealt with before. For the mixed fuel option, like we mentioned, you could still use natural gas with these proposals, but you'd have to do extra efficiency. How much that costs depends on exactly what extra efficiency a builder would select. There's a number of packages that are already predetermined in the energy code itself, and those range from $500 to $1,500 each. And then you would add in the cost of electric ready. So just making sure that a future building owner or homeowner can plug in an electric alternative. And that's about $300 each for a water heater and a stove. None for the heat pump because you're presumably accommodating that anyway for air conditioning. I realize not all of your homes in Eagle County will be putting in air conditioning, but it does seem to be the trend with our warming summers. Next slide. Okay, back to efficiency strengthening, and I'll pass it back to Shauna.
Go ahead, next slide. All right, so I didn't know that I was on this one, sorry. We do have some efficiency strengthening recommendations in here that are outside of the EV/PV electrification, and mostly focusing on reducing the energy bills and trying to get us, everybody's going to net zero at some point, and we're trying to progress towards that net zero goal. So we've looked through the code to find what we could do that's already in the code and maybe take a few things just one step further, and what are the most cost-effective ways to do that. So we did find a few amendments that we could make to the 2021 IECC provisions. Next slide. There are some people who already have additional efficiency amendments in there. Avon with their natural gas equipment efficiency minimums, Basalt with the radiant barriers on the roof. That's probably going to come in the code as a base minimum here soon. A lot of people going to the radiant barriers. A lot of other people in just last night, we passed Aspen's code through City Council. And so a lot of amendments in there to take things a little bit further than the 2021 does prescriptively or as a base minimum. So almost everybody is finding some way to get a little bit of more additional efficiency out of the 2021 code. Some people say it went far enough, but almost every jurisdiction is taking it further. So it's hard to argue that it has gone too far when everybody's trying to make it better. All right, next slide. So our recommendation is some of the recommendations that we're making as the cohort to amend in the 2021 is the water heating, the water piping insulation, make sure that all the water piping is getting insulated. Right now, there's some requirements in there for hot water pipe insulation, but it's based on size and different things. And so asking that we do all hot water piping get insulated, and then install timers on the heat tape. A lot of jurisdictions are adding this in some form or fashion to make sure that that heat tape isn't just running all the time, even when the weather outside is warm enough or that dark roof is warm enough to melt that snow. Next slide. Let's see. All right. Sorry, I need some water. So for existing buildings, what we've looked at is to just require an energy audit, kind of to look at what could be done if I am. It's not really saying that you have to do something, but it's asking you to put some thought into it. And so it's saying if I'm remodeling an existing building, and this is residential, that I'm going to provide a report that says that I've looked at what possible upgrades I could do for energy efficiency that might fit into the scope of work that I'm doing. And so it's really just requiring that people put some thought into it, no necessary action required. Install programmable thermostats. That's a requirement right now, but for new construction, we're saying on your existing, if you upgrade your system or you put in a new space heating system, then to please make sure that the thermostats are programmable. And then if you're going to upgrade your heating, ventilating, air conditioning systems, then to at least get some quotes for both gas and electric, so that you could say, okay, so that people can make a more conscious decision. A lot of people just, oh, I'm going to put in gas because that's what's there. But if you get quotes for gas and electric and see that maybe it's not as much to do electric, then they can make a conscious decision right there to do that. So just asking that you get the quotes for that. Next slide. And then I don't know who I'm transferring it to. Claire, maybe?
Yep, that's me, Shauna.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Claire Cantor with Lotus Engineering and Sustainability. Bear with us, we've got one more code element to tell you about, and that is the Exterior Energy Offset Program. The meaning of this is essentially in the name. This would be code language that addresses energy use from basically equipment located outside. So think of your snow melt systems, your hot tubs, your pools. And then next slide, Gina. Thank you. And the reason we're including this in the code cohort is because frankly, to that first bullet point, it takes a lot of energy to quote unquote heat the outside. I mean, if you have a snow melt system or a hot tub or pool, especially if it's uncovered, it takes a lot of energy because it's fighting against open air. So there had to be a way to address this sort of excess energy consumption in the code and hopefully mitigate that or make those systems a little more efficient. Additionally, the International Energy Conservation Code, that IECC, doesn't address the efficiency of these exterior systems. So that's where that program comes into play. Next slide. Basically, there are two programs that currently exist that address this exterior energy. So the good thing is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. And I'll talk about where these programs exist in the next slide, but first, two programs that we have are the EEOP, Exterior Energy Offset Program, and then the Renewable Energy Mitigation Program, or the REMP. At its core, they're the exact same thing. They are both designed to encourage those energy efficient solutions for those equipments that are outdoors. But with REMP, there were some communities with some different goals, and REMP as a program evolved a little bit more than the EEOP did. So REMP ended up adding in additional fees for homes with more square feet. And then it also included commercial buildings, whereas the EEOP just focuses on residential buildings. So basically one evolved a little bit more than the other. Next slide. And who has these in the cohort? We already have some communities who have the EEOP in place. Those include Avon, Eagle County, and Minturn. And then communities in and around Pitkin County have that REMP program, Aspen, Pitkin County, and then Basalt. And then Summit County is currently considering REMP as well. Next slide. So before I talk about the updates, it would be helpful, of course, to know how the current EEOP is structured. Basically, there's this calculator tool that exists that takes into account the annual energy consumption of for the life of whatever system is being considered. So that's snowmelt, spa, or pool. And it spits out two things. The first is how much solar it would take to offset half or 50% of that energy consumption. Or it gives you a fee in lieu, and that fee in lieu is calculated using a couple factors, including square footage thresholds, depending on the equipment type, and then the cost of natural gas. But as you can see, that is a little bit outdated. And then that table at the bottom of the slide, it shows what those fees might look like. Next slide. So the updates that the code cohort is considering is essentially updating that calculator to be more on par with the REMP. We are working with an engineering group. I believe they're called REG Engineering, and I think they're out of Crested Butte. Thanks for the nod, Gina. So we want to ensure that that calculator includes defensible calculations and then components and assumptions and conversion factors that are relevant to Eagle County. And then in addition, some of the standards that the original EEOP calculator uses needed to be updated. So ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And they put out a bunch of standards, but they have a standard that gives you an assumed energy consumption for snowmelt systems to use in this calculation. So we would update the calculator to include that updated standard. And so that gets at update number 1. And then for update number 2, we would adjust that fee in lieu piece to be exactly what the cost is to install solar on site. I think this makes the fee in lieu just a little bit easier. And then additionally, it encourages that solar installation because it's either pay the exact same amount without the panels or with the panels, and we want to encourage the panels. And then for number 3, kind of as I alluded to before, we want to add provisions into the calculator to account for commercial buildings. And then lastly, we want to expand that equipment list that this applies to. Like I said before, the EEOP was originally spas, pools, and snowmelt systems, and then we want to add outdoor fireplaces to this as well. So that is the high-level gist, and I'll pass it back to the team for the Q&A session, and it looks like we already have a few in there.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for providing some added context to our recommendations. We are now going to open it up for Q&A, and we may just start with what's already in this chat. But for our participants, if you'd like to raise your hand, I can give you talking permissions, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for the time being. All right. It looks like our first question in the chat is to have an all-electric home with heat pump heating. This typically requires a 400 amp electric service. Will this be a requirement in new construction? This can get overlooked if not a requirement and is a large cost to change an electrical service.
Good question. That's not explicitly written in there. We know that at least at a minimum 200 amp panels have become the default norm, almost 100%. It is really tight if you're trying to service a heat pump water heater, and an electric vehicle all on a 200 amp panel. It can be done, but you're really maxing it out. And in that case, you would probably need some additional equipment to manage those loads, such as a smart panel that can make sure that you're not charging your EV at the same time that your heat pump and heat pump water heater are running. So there are technical ways to deal with it, but it's not easy. 400 would be more likely, but that is not, that 400 would be more likely to easily accommodate all the loads, but that's not currently required in the IECC or in the proposed amendments. We do secretly wish that there were more options in between 200 and 400 for sale, but they're harder to come by.
Thanks, Christine. Next on the list, CJ Jarecki just wants to inform us that Vail also has minimum equipment efficiency requirements. Mary Wiener would like to ask if heat tape timer is required. Many timers may be set for the peak time, 4 to 9 p.m. for Holy Cross Energy and into the evening. Will there be education around setting timers to run during the day and off at night?
Yeah, I can answer that one. I mean, we just kind of did an overview on it, but it is actually going to be a requirement. The wording will talk about running during the day, and it must be shut off for a minimum of 8 hours, I think, at night or something. We have that wording. So yeah, definitely some education, but the wording is specific to make sure that it is on during the day.
Thank you, Shada. And Adam Quinton is wondering if we'd be able to share the slides. Team, is that something that we can do? Yeah, okay, great. We'll make sure to share this along with the recording and the survey and the FAQ and all the other resources after we finish convening. An anonymous attendee is asking, I may have missed it, but are there any thoughts around battery storage requirements related to the code?
Thoughts, yes, and then it's included in a very minor way, and that is on the commercial side. The proposed amendments include, as you heard, the Solar Ready Appendix. And on the commercial side, the Solar Ready Appendix already includes energy storage ready. You have to have physical space for a future energy storage system and the conduit going to that space. So we didn't write that. That's already in the commercial Solar Ready Appendix. As far as requiring us energy storage, that's not in there, but it is definitely something that is on everyone's radar. And I would imagine we'll start seeing more of those types of amendments for energy storage, not in this round, but in the next round. We heard a number of jurisdictions that have that as their plan to do just that. So keep your eyes out, and if it is again something that you strongly want your own community to consider, then bring that up with your city council for sure.
And I would just add that I think a lot of the reasons that we haven't gone there in depth is because we were kind of waiting to see what the building and fire codes said about it. They were addressing the battery storage, and so kind of waiting to see those requirements come out before we start putting stuff so that we're not in conflict and that we harmonize. And the 2021 finally started going there. The 2024 will really cover it in depth. So I think you'll start seeing more of that now that we can create language that won't be in conflict with the fire code, especially.
Thanks, everyone. We have more of a comment from Eddie Wilson with the Tone of Eagle, who just wanted to shed light on the dangers associated with natural gas stoves and the leakages and the reports that have been put out on these as of recently. And I don't know if this team has any thoughts they want to share, but that is definitely something that all electric amendments can certainly tackle with getting rid of natural gas. And just as a reminder, oh, we have another comment in here. I just wanted to throw a reminder in there, but if anybody else would like to just raise their hand. We also have the ability to allow you to speak if you'd prefer that. Okay. If the 2021 IECC is adopted fairly soon by most communities in Eagle County, do the electric service providers have the infrastructure to meet the demand? And if not, when do they expect it to be ready for the demand?
We did include Holy Cross and other relevant utilities in the process as we were evaluating, screening, reviewing, and revising potential amendments, and they said it is fine. They are in support of a movement towards electrification, and they're aware of it, so they have it planned in their short-term, medium-term, and long-term capacity planning to make sure that there is sufficient load there. In general, just to say across the board, utilities here in Colorado broadly have extra capacity to serve heat pumps and heat pump water heaters because they have a summer peak load. And so when that extra electric load comes in the winter time, they have that capacity to spare, so to speak. The other thing is that this is for new construction only, and so you're adding a building here and there at a time. And the utilities, just like they do for any building, have to make sure that they have enough capacity for that. For instance, a new Walmart gets put in down the road, they have to have capacity to serve that new Walmart. So it's the same with additional heat pump technology. And in fact, that's why utilities here tend to be in favor of these types of building codes, because they can gradually add in new construction and they avoid this huge cliff that would come in, I don't know, 2030 if everyone's retrofits at the same time. So we're bringing buildings gradually into electrification rather than rather than having everyone switch over all at once.
All right, thank you. Eric Miller says, we have not addressed how the 2021 code cycle will increase requirements for additional insulation, continuous insulation, and other changes to the manner in which these buildings have to be insulated and air sealed. Is that beyond the scope of this cohort? It appears that building officials are allowing workarounds for some of these requirements. Any updates on this subject?
I would just say that the 2021 does take an increase in their already workarounds in the code, because there's so many different paths of compliance. If you don't like the prescriptive requirements, you could go performance or UA. There are different ways to work around it. So not sure about the workarounds, but the cohort was looking at, okay, what is the state going to require? The state's going to require people to get to the 2021. That code is already written. It's always going to require EV, PV, and electrification, some form of that. Those are not written. And so we mostly focused on the additional things like the electric vehicles, the solar ready, and the electrification. We did, like I said earlier, maybe provide a few suggestions on how to some amendments that we could make to the energy code, but basically we didn't tackle the whole energy code as a whole. There are definitely recommendations that we could make for a jurisdiction that wants to change that, just keeping in mind that there is the state law does say that we can't amend a code to be less restrictive than it is. So we have to be careful about how those amendments are placed, but we're happy to work with anybody if you want to make additional amendments to the base code. We just didn't tackle it as a whole for the cohort.
Thanks, Shauna. Adam Quinton's wondering, how do the IRA incentives impact the way you are thinking about codes for retrofits? The IRA rebates for adding heat pumps, larger panels, updating wiring, electric stoves, etc., are pretty material, up to $8,000 for a heat pump, depending on income. So to reiterate the question, how are these IRA incentives impacting the way that we're thinking about codes for retrofits?
The IRA incentives change the game completely. It's going to accelerate retrofits. most of the incentives available from the IRA are for retrofits, not for new construction, with a few exceptions. And so we do hope, we do expect that will accelerate the transition towards all electric, but it wasn't considered in depth in the cohort process, I would say, for a couple different reasons. One is that the IRA kind of caught a lot of people off guard because it seemed like for a long time it wasn't going to happen. And then second of all, we started by looking mostly at new buildings. Because the code in general is more targeted at new buildings, and it does already have its procedures for what triggers complying with the code for existing buildings, including additions, alterations, and renovations. And so the amendments that the cohort proposes for existing buildings are really minor things to kind of walk us towards that while not requiring a widespread change. And that's because it is more new. It's really easy to build it right the first time. But for retrofits, every home and building is different. You might need a new duct system, who knows. You might have radiant heating or boilers where it's harder to change, so requiring that didn't seem feasible at this juncture, or probably in the next juncture. But that is, again, something that you could bring up to your elected officials and either encourage a stronger stick approach or a stronger carrot approach.
I just want to time check us because we're about 3 minutes till we wrap up. Really quickly, Christine or Shauna, do you want to just speak to when these IRA rebates will likely be available? I know that there's a lot of, up in the airness to that.
Yeah, let me speak to the homeowner side. Right now, so starting January 1st, a week or two ago, you can get a 30% tax credit for heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, induction stoves, EV chargers, panel upgrades. And so that's a done deal. That'll come up on your taxes. Same with the state tax credit at 10% for those pieces of equipment. Just claim it on your taxes. Then there's additional incentives that will be run through the energy office. That's called the HOMES program and the HERA program. And that is where even more money comes out. And they are waiting for guidance from DOE, so they can't start designing their programs until that comes. Everyone is just waiting. And it could be 1 year, it could be 2 years. That's what they're saying before they get those programs stood up. And it is not clear if they'll be able to retroactively give those incentives to people, for instance, that buy a heat pump now. So even though they're eligible, there's no guidance on how to do that. And so everyone's just kind of hanging in the air there.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask everybody to hold on real quick because I have some information regarding follow-up I want to share, but I do want to address this one last question. So when will Eagle County and jurisdictions start enforcing? And I'm fine to answer this question. We are working with communities on adoption and implementation as we speak. And while everybody has a little bit of a different timeline, the ultimate goal is before that July 1, 2023 deadline, where the state enforcement jumps in. So thank you everybody for your questions. I hope that that was informative for all of you. And I'm going to share my screen one last time. Okay, so just some information on next steps. We do have a survey to solicit your public feedback, which is really, really critical to this work. So we will send that out to all registrants. You will receive a survey as well as an FAQ that could likely answer all the anticipated questions that we thought you guys might have. And so we ask that you please fill that out. It will be open through February 11th. And there will be that FAQ page as well as fact sheets to hopefully answer any questions that remain. The feedback that you all provide will be discussed and incorporated into our final recommendations, and then those will go on to each community for review and formal adoption. So thank you very much. I want to send a huge thank you to all of you for attending, as well as Kim and Claire with Lotus, Christine with Sweep, Shauna with Mozingo Code Group, and our Walking Mountains team of myself, Will, and Nikki Moline. So thank you guys for attending, and to all the towns and sustainability staff that have been participating on this work with us. So remember to keep an eye out for that survey link and fill it out before February 11th. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.